Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the Russo-Ukrainian War. Now, today I wanted to, while also talking about what is happening on the ground between the two sides, I want to talk about what is happening here in the United States in regards to the perception of the conflict, the sides that are being picked here in the United States. And it's very strange. It's very strange indeed. You have you have groups. Obviously, you have the Democrats, you have the Republicans, you have independents here in the United States. And I would say, by and large, the left here in the United States, the Democratic Party, is on the side of Ukraine. Now, you also have a very large proportion of Republicans, conservatives, independents that are also on the side of this war and on the side of the Ukrainians as well. Now, what I've come to understand is that there's really no room for dialogue in terms of supporting Ukraine or not supporting Ukraine. Even just on this channel, when I try to report what is happening on the ground and by and large my analysis of the situation, what is happening, and with the understanding of history as well, what is happening, what could happen. And that is unpopular. And it's on both sides of the equation, left and right, if they are supporting the Ukrainians. And what I've noticed is a lot of those folks, and I wouldn't say all of them, have really kind of bought into the whole mainstream media narrative of what is happening. You know, did the Russians launch an invasion of Ukraine? Yes, they did. But it's more complicated than that. I don't think people are willing to get their heads around prior events. They're very much focused on the fact that the Russians initiated hostilities. The Russians threw the first punch, so to speak. But again, much deeper than that. And therein lies the issue here in the United States, is many of those folks are not willing to have a good look and understand about what has occurred since the collapse of the Soviet Union. And that's a very important factor to look at and understand what happened and kind of why we're at and where we're at now. And then you have elements also of the old Cold War era. You have conservative Americans like myself who were in the military during the Cold War or at the collapse of the Soviet Union or grew up during the Cold War and perceived, and has always really kind of perceived, the Russians, aka the Soviets, as this threat. And I think that has carried over into the modern era regarding some of these individuals. Again, they kind of were in the military, they were in intelligence agencies, what have you, and they were focused on defeating the Soviet Union. And they still have that animosity towards the Russians. So very interesting dynamic. But again, looking back in terms of the byproduct of the collapse of the Soviet Union, it's just not looked at. And you have to try to understand the Russian perceptions. You have to understand why the Russians pulled the trigger and the Russians moved. I think if the shoe was on the other foot, And I've tried to talk about this in the past in terms of what if the Soviets had won the Cold War and certain areas near, around, or even in the United States had converted to the Warsaw Pact sphere. That would create a lot of animosity. And essentially that is what has happened, especially with Ukraine, attempted Western inroads into Belarusia, and then obviously the Baltics as well, with the Baltic states becoming part of NATO, which I believe was a mistake. Really doesn't matter though. So definitely feeling it in the comment section in regards to reporting. I would say by and large, most people that are trying to gain news who vehemently support the Ukrainians only want what I call Slava Ukraine, Glory Borderlands news. They only want news and information that is going to support this narrative that Ukraine is winning and is going to win beyond a shadow of a doubt. It's just a foregone conclusion. And that's not what is going to happen. Are the Ukrainians doing much better than initially anticipated? Yes, absolutely. Did many people have the belief that the Russians were just going to roll over and seize Kiev? Yeah, I think many folks did. And I think that has kind of in a large part played into the dynamic now that we are seeing in regards to the support for the Ukrainians. Who doesn't like an underdog? And here in the United States, the Ukrainians are seen as an underdog. And then compounding all those other issues, therein lies the crux of it. So just kind of my take on that. And again, very difficult to report what is happening on the ground. Any Russian victory that is reported is perceived very negatively, meaning the person reporting the Russian victory then becomes the victim of this ideology, this back Ukraine at all cost. All cost. And that's where I have concerns. I don't believe that the United States should back Ukraine at all cost. Our destruction is not worth this area. And like it or not, the Russians possess large amounts of nuclear weapons that could change the face of the planet forever. Economically, militarily, society ultimately collapse. Which I think we're heading that way anyway here in the West, especially here in the United States. I don't know what it looks like where you're at, but things are getting weird here. So, what is happening on the ground right now as we watch this conflict? So, right now, Ukrainian progress is being measured quite literally in hundreds of meters. Hundreds of meters is what we are looking at in terms of advances made by Ukrainian forces. And again, this is a Ukrainian site. Now, the largest area where the Ukrainians have had success is up here near Makarivka. And if you just kind of measure what this map is stating, 5 kilometers. 5 kilometers in 10 days. And in the area where the Ukrainians believe they have had the greatest penetration. And in reality, they've created a kill box for the Russians. They've not penetrated the Russian second, third line of defense in this area, and it's quite possible the Russians have allowed this salient to be created, because this is a very difficult area for the Ukrainians to be in right now. Same with the areas near Orikhiv, one of the Ukrainians' best units. And I've talked about this before. Go over to this site here where you can see the actual unit composition. 47th Mechanized Brigade. This is essentially a NATO-trained unit from the ground up. And that area of success for the Ukrainians, we'll just look at it, and again, we'll just kind of measure the distance of success. 1.6 kilometers. So again, in an open field. Tough situation. Tough road for the Ukrainians right now. It's not going well for them. Not going well at all. Now, the narrative here in the United States, and a lot of this information is coming from the Ukrainian side, is that the Ukrainians are killing a lot of Russians, and the Ukrainians are making progress. Now, there's no elation on the Ukrainian side right now. I would say that most Ukrainians, most supporters of the Ukrainian side who have a decent understanding of military operations, those folks understand that the Ukrainians are not having a lot of success with this operation. So again, this is the Bakhmut area, and again, greatest success up here in the northwest, as we talked about yesterday. Not a lot of changes day in and day out. Again, hundreds of meters in a day at best is kind of what we're seeing. So then, what happens next? If the West is this serious about success in Ukraine, I mean, you're either going to win or you're not going to win. And Russia is not going away. I don't know if there's this misconception that suddenly Russia is just going to disappear. That's not what's going to happen. And I don't think we're going to see a collapse of the Russian Federation either. If that happens, if we see that start to manifest itself, that's even worse for the West. I don't think people are looking at end games here and then what could happen. And that's not good for the West either. Again, nuclear weapons. Lots and lots of nuclear weapons. So that's kind of where we set for today. Again, not a lot of movement on the ground. It's very apparent, and it hasn't been officially announced yet. I don't think at any point the Ukrainians are going to come out and say that this operation did not go as planned. We met more resistance than we anticipated. We didn't have air cover, and we're essentially stalled. We're going to have to hit the pause button, reassess, re-equip, and look at future-facing operations. I don't think they're going to say that. And then again, what happens with the United States? What decision-making processes happens now? What additional layer of support does the West offer Ukraine? What does that look like? Is it F-16s? Is it air power? Do they start talking about no-fly zones? And then ultimately we head towards World War III. Which, again, we're heading in that direction. Just look at history. Look at the way conflicts evolve. Look at World War I. Look at World War II. None of this is any different. It's just a different locale, different ideologies, different governments. But the process of war and eventually evolving into global war are the same. And that's kind of where we're heading, unfortunately. So that's it for today. As always, thanks for joining us. More to come very, very soon. I want to have an in-depth look at the Second American Civil War. Creating some content on that. Hope you'll join us. Hope you'll have a lively discussion. And as always, have a good day.